My first foreign trip as President of the United States will be to Saudi Arabia.
Now, Donald Trump's increasingly close ties to Saudi Arabia have formed a key part of his policy in the Middle East. But what impact are those relations having on the region? Let's bring in two faces now that know the region. In London, we have Mehrdad Khonsari. He's a former Iranian diplomat and a senior consultant with the Iranian Center for Policy Studies. And from Washington, D.C., Michael Pregent. He's a former Middle East intelligence officer and now a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. First of all, to you, Michael Pregent. It's been reported that Barack Obama tried to have an even-handed approach with Saudi Arabia and Iran, saying they should learn to share the neighborhood. Trump's clearly with the Saudis. Is that a wrong step, and what dangers are there in pursuing that policy?
I think the language of sharing the Middle East should be insulting to everybody else in the region, to Egyptians, Jordanians, Syrians, Iraqis. I don't think that Iran or Saudi Arabia should exert that sort of influence. But what we've seen in the past is we've seen that Iran is much better at this. The IRGC Quds Force is better at destabilizing countries. And of course you have Saudi adventurism where you have members of the royal family that dole out cash to certain terrorist groups in the past that have been ineffective. Iran is able to align their proxies with Iranian strategy, and the Saudis have not been able to do anything like that. So I think sharing the Middle East, I think, is an insult to the rest of the countries in the region.
Mehrdad, the US have categorized Iran as the biggest sponsor of state terror on the planet. I mean, I assume you don't agree with that assertion. And what would you make of the current US policy towards Iran?
Well, I think that, first of all, the term the biggest state sponsor of terrorism is a little inaccurate at this time, given the fact that the biggest threat coming from terrorism does not come from states today, but comes from non-state actors like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Obviously, Iran has been implicated in this kind of things in the past, but it's over-exaggerating Iran's role in terrorism at this time that we are, so that we are existing.
Michael Pregent, the signing, as soon as Trump came into office, of this $100 billion arms deal, I mean, was that a necessary step? Do the Saudis need more weapons to defend themselves in the region? Or was that signaling to his supporters, maybe Israel, that Donald Trump is firmly with the House of Saud?
Well, we can't necessarily sell weapons to Iran. I mean, while the regime is in control of it. The administration is not likely to go forward with the Boeing deal as well. But these arms sales to Saudi Arabia, I don't think really matter. If you look at what Hezbollah can do, and Hezbollah receives about $500 million a year from Iran, versus what one F-15 can do, or F-16 can do. But an F-16 is valued at $156 million. I'm just saying $100 billion versus what Iran's
absolutely, the numbers are right, but symbolically, in terms of making that your first stop, if you're trying to bring down the tensions in the region, favouring one side so heavily over the other is destabilizing.
I think it's absolutely what the president should have done based on the way President Obama treated traditional Sunni regional allies. I had no problem with the president going to Saudi Arabia first. I think it was the right thing to do, to stand up to counter radical centers that they stood up against Sunni terrorists like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Those things are good things. We have to follow through. We need to see tangible steps by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to actually go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and that's something that we're looking at. That's something that we're making sure happens as the U.S. Restores this traditional alliance.
I mean, there's an argument, Michael, just to stick with you for a second, that Trump's belligerent behaviour towards Iran is actually counterproductive. There's never been such a nationalistic feeling in Iran against the United States and against Saudi Arabia because of precisely the policies that Donald Trump is currently employing. They're actually reinforcing the whole situation.
That may have been true before the Iranian protests. The Iranian protests were actually a criticism of what the regime and the IRGC have done to squander away the $100 billion they received after the Iran deal.
There's also an issue with the spreading of the money coming back.
Well, yeah, the money coming back, it was sanctioned to begin with because the money was involved in the proliferation of nuclear materials, the proliferation of terrorism. You know, the money was already dirty to begin with. So the money was going to go back to the people that had it, and that was the regime, the IRGC. They've been able to use that money to continue to destabilize Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. So the protests undercut that whole argument that somehow Trump has united the Iranians against the West, when in fact the protesters actually benefited from hearing something from a U.S. president that actually backed them up, saying that they have the right to ask for freedom from their country, or from their leadership, to democrat reforms from their leadership. So the protests undercut the argument that Trump has somehow, you know, brought the Iranian people together to counter what the U.S. is doing.
Madad Kansari, just pick up on the facts of those protests, if you would, for me, please. And also on this idea of Iranian unity and nationalism in the face of the Trump administration's belligerence.
Well, I think that Trump's support for the democratic movement is certainly a positive step, something that the Obama administration did not do in 2009. But you have to bear in mind that Iranian behavior in the last 5 years, since the advent of President Rouhani, has been markedly different than Iranian behavior in the past. The nuclear agreement ended sort of Iran's isolation, and Iran showed, the Iranian government gave open signs that it wants to be reintegrated, and that line should have been encouraged instead of discouraged. When your guest says that Iran is a destabilizing factor in the Middle East, it all depends how you look at it. Iranians' position is to support the officially recognized governments of Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Now, that would not be called, this is the official government that is recognized by the UN. The Saudis do the same in Yemen. Their whole position hinges on the fact that they are supporting the official government of Yemen, which sits in Riyadh, and that is not called destabilizing, whereas Iran is called a destabilizer. What I want to say is that Iran-U.S. relations is governed on rhetoric, not on logic and interest. And so long as rhetoric on both sides, you know, acts in the way that it does, unfortunately, it does not do a service to either world peace or regional peace.
Okay, Madad Kansari, Michael President, gentlemen, thank you both very much for joining us.